Well, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome. We're glad you're here for today's webinar, Good, Risky, or Unknown, the Ethics of Everyday AI. I'm Greg Berry, Director of Communications in the Office of Alumni Affairs. A disclaimer, as with any virtual event, occasional technical hiccups may occur. So if you experience video or audio issues, just click the reconnect button or refresh your screen to return to the presentation quickly. Let's start off with a quick poll to get to know our audience a bit. When new AI technology appears, what's your typical reaction? Is it sign me up? I'll wait and see. Who created this and why? How could this thing go wrong? Or I need a coffee before even deciding. Go ahead, make your selection. We're going to take a look at the results in just a moment. Just a heads up, we are recording today's webinar. Our live audience will get an email with the link once it's ready. Joining us today is Dr. Josh May. Dr. May is a professor of philosophy here at UAB. He holds a BA from CSU Sacramento and a PhD from UC Santa Barbara, both in philosophy. Today's webinar is the second in a three-part AI series. You can take a look back at the first, Everyday AI, Smart Tools for Work and Life, by visiting our YouTube channel or going to alumni.uab.edu/videos. We'll end the series on August 27th when we host Behind the Screens, What AI-Powered Care Means for Patients. A look at how AI is transforming healthcare and the patient experience. You can register for those at alumni.uab.edu/events. Before turning things over to Dr. May, let's take a look at the results of that earlier poll. I'm going to go ahead and shut that down. It looks like 37% of our audience say who created this and why. A third say they wait and see when new AI technology appears. I'm going to go ahead and reset that poll, and we're going to ask another one. If an AI system consistently makes better decisions than humans, should humans still have the final say? The answers that you can select from are always, usually, only in high-stakes situations, or no. We're going to keep up that poll for a little bit so you can submit your answer that best matches you. We'll drop the results in the chat in a bit. At this time, Josh, welcome. Thank you so much for being here. I know you're going to go ahead and share your screen. We're looking forward to this session.
Thanks for having me. Yeah, and thanks for organizing this. I'm really excited to hear what everyone thinks about this topic.
You are incredibly welcome.
I will share my, window here.
There we are.
Can you see it? Okay, great.
Yep.
So good, risky, or unknown? My answer is all of the above. So I want to talk today a little bit about some of the everyday ethical issues with AI. There are plenty of other issues, and say a little bit about this new grad certificate that we are launching at UAB in Ethical Dimensions of AI, which I'm the director for. But first, we'll talk about some of those ethical issues and give you a sense of some of the things that you might be grappling with. And I love that we started out with the poll, because it sounds like quite a few of you do have concerns about new AI technologies. And as it happens, I started off the presentation here with some polling data of the general American public. And it looks like most Americans are more concerned than excited about AI. And that's only gotten worse since the release of large language models like ChatGPT a few years ago. But things are shifting, and it's such an interesting space, and it really depends on what question you're asking about. So I think it's very hard to say, is AI good or bad in general, or something to be concerned about? It really depends on which kind of issue we're talking about. And this polling data from Pew suggests that people think that there are some situations where AI can be more an improvement for society rather than something that'll make it worse. And so the biggest concern seems to be with thinking creatively and meaningful relationships with other people. Many people think that AI is going to make that worse rather than better. But when it comes to solving problems, more people think that that'll be better, especially if we zero in on certain kinds of problems. Most people think that AI will be great for medicine. And that makes sense. If we can use it in science and in healthcare, that might make things more efficient, make things more affordable, get breakthroughs with new drugs. And as we get down to the bottom here, again, those personal relationships, most people think it'll have a negative impact on society, but also things like democracy, elections, the news that people are getting, and the environment and the arts, which we'll talk a little bit about today. But just starting here, I think it's important to see that AI isn't one thing. There are different kinds of use cases. There are also different kinds of AI. There are AI algorithms that power many aspects of healthcare already, social media algorithms also. But when we think of AI these days, we often think of large language models or chatbots like ChatGPT, Claude, and Gemini. That'll really be my focus for today, but we are still thinking more about AI more broadly, including other forms of generative AI like image generators. So AI is not one thing. Really hard to say, is AI good or bad in general? It really depends on which kind of AI that we're talking about and which use case. So as with most areas of ethics, we have to evaluate it more on a case-by-case basis. So is using AI yourself unethical? Same sort of thing, I think. Well, it just depends. What kind of use? How are you using it? And we'll talk about some of those today. So we want to use AI responsibly. And of course, that is not incompatible with regulation as well. I just won't really talk about regulation and AI governance much today because we're thinking about everyday usage. But there are a number of clear ways in which we can, have more responsible uses of AI in our own lives. One is to avoid that kind of de-skilling or in value. We can use, AI as a tool, but sometimes leaning too much on that tool can lead some of your writing abilities, critical thinking abilities to, erode or waste away. So here's one way to think about it is you could use chatbots, for example, to generate inputs to your thinking, but not just outputs for others to read. We have a number of students who are tempted to use these chatbots to just generate essays for them or text for them. And there might be some very mundane uses for generating a simple email that might be useful to someone, but there is always that risk of relying too much on it and then losing some of those skills yourself. So here's one way that I like to think about it is inputs to the thinking rather than outputs, things like giving you ideas, thinking about alternatives, maybe coming up with examples, but in ways that are not just doing the thinking for you. Another key element of responsible use is keeping humans in the loop. So that was the second polling question that we had on there. And there might be disagreements about, do we need to have humans for everything, only for high stakes situations? But in general, important to make sure that we're just using it as a tool rather than replacing humans or replacing your own judgment. So it can be more of like an intellectual consultant rather than a replacement. You can consider what the output says, but you don't necessarily have to accept it. And also in general, we can use AI to enhance abilities rather than to replace them or even to replace people. So I'll give you an example with this image right over here, which is, of course, our mascot, Blaze the Dragon. And he's in the classical thinker's pose, which we often use to illustrate as philosophy. Well, I generated this with an AI system. And, I'm often tasked with doing talks like this and promoting the good work that we're doing in the philosophy department. And it's nice to have some good images that help to illustrate that. We don't have, a graphic designer or an artist in residence in the philosophy department. This would be something that I would have to do, and I do not have graphic design abilities. So here, if I use, the AI system to generate an image, I'm not necessarily replacing an ability I have. It's an ability that I don't have. So I'm enhancing some of these abilities. And it's not like I'm using this instead of, paying a student worker. We don't have the budget for that. We don't have anybody who's doing this kind of art for us. But I'll tell you, this was a little bit of a labor I had to put in to make this work, because initially I had tried to generate this image with Claude, which at the time, this is a while back, I didn't realize that Claude doesn't have an image generator like ChatGPT. And so I put in the prompt, to make a version of the cartoon version of Blaze, but in the thinker's pose. And here is what Claude output, which was laughable. And I then found out, okay, this was basically Claude just tried to generate this with some Python code, some line drawings. Anyways, but by doing a little bit of work, I was able to generate a very useful image that I can use for lots of different contexts of talks and promoting the department. But of course, in general, we should make sure that we're not engaging in frivolous uses or things that are useless. We want to use AI for good and to minimize the kinds of harms that we're participating in. So I want to turn a little bit to some of the harms that have raised a lot of concerns for some people, especially the environmental impact of data centers that power all of these AI technologies. And it's true that there are environmental impacts from data centers. They do use a lot of water to cool all of the chips and computers in there. They also just use a lot of energy, and for that reason then do produce carbon emissions. So there are a number of ways that data centers are impacting the environment. And as you can see from the image over here, now a Google search which has the AI summary in it is using quite a bit more water and energy than a regular old Google search from 2019, which didn't have the AI summary, or output from a chatbot like ChatGPT. So quite a bit more energy and thus more emissions and water. But we do need to think about, is this worse than what's already accepted, what we already think of as legitimate uses? This is about 10 times more, it says, in energy consumption. But if the Google search itself is a minuscule amount of energy, 10x of that is not necessarily a big deal. So we have to think about relevant comparisons. I'll give you a couple just to put things in context with this. So 1 hour of TV streaming is equivalent to about 120 queries to a chatbot in terms of water use, at least. And really, data centers are not new. We've had data centers powering Netflix and YouTube and the internet for a very long time. Also with water use, I'm going to have to go after your lunch here. A hamburger requires about 660 gallons of water to produce, and that's equivalent to about 200,000 queries to a chatbot. So maybe not quite as bad as comparison to some of the other everyday things that we're doing. And then now to turn to carbon emissions, one query to a chatbot is about the equivalent of driving your car 4 feet. So certainly there are some environmental impacts, but we have to sort of put it in context and think about what is the proportion that this would be taking up from your overall energy or carbon footprint. One analysis suggests that even just 100 prompts to a chatbot is a tiny fraction of the average American's daily emissions. Same for all of AI use for global emissions. Of course, this could grow over time and could grow quite dramatically as AI use increases. But we also have to put this in terms of context. So if you're concerned about energy, water, and carbon, we also have to think about the other ways in which we're contributing through streaming, through golf courses. Sorry for you golf lovers out there. They require a lot of water use for not that many people to use. Or concrete is one of the industries that is the most carbon intensive. And I don't have sidewalks in my in my neighborhood. I really wish we did, but now I'm a little worried, right? So there's always, you got to think about the different potential harms and weigh them against other kinds of benefits. And this is really familiar from ethics. We talk about moral complicity all the time in ethics. It's not new with AI. And we've had this notion of like a carbon footprint for quite a long time. And really, it's hard to get away from any kind of complicity. We're all complicit in some sort of harm in this large globalized economy. All of these products that we have can be, have a long production line that could be traced back to lots of different companies who could be engaging in some bad labor practices. And it's not that we should turn a blind eye to any of that, or that we should keep our heads in the sand. But our responsibility is really to be diligent, to be conscientious consumers, and to minimize our harm. So moral purity on this or any sort of issue is really often a pipe dream. We can't really have completely clean hands. But again, that wouldn't mean that we shouldn't be paying attention to it, but only that we have to think about the different kinds of harms, how it can minimize them. Now, there are some red lines, and for some people, they say, maybe they don't get any benefit from using it if they feel like it's just adding to various kinds of harms. A lot of us would say this about child labor. If there's a clothing company that produces their clothes through using child labor overseas, you might say, look, that's just red line for me. I'm not going to just minimize the amount of clothing I buy from them. I'm not going to buy any from them. But often that's because there are alternatives. There are other clothing companies. But it's increasingly very difficult to completely opt out from AI use. It's become part of everything. Just Google search. It's integrated into so many apps, even if we don't plan to use AI. So hard to opt out. It becomes ubiquitous, and we can only minimize the amount of harm that it's going to cause. And again, this is sort of familiar from ethics. It just always involves these trade-offs. You're often able to promote one value only if you can have it as the sacrifice of another value. So just to give you a few simple examples, if you decided to snitch on your friend who committed a crime, sure, you're promoting justice and fairness, but at the expense of being loyal to your friend. And sometimes people go the other way. They decide, I'm actually going to be loyal to my friend, and whatever, doesn't matter if they have to, take a sacrifice on justice. Or think about your decision for your career, you're a computer programmer, but you didn't decide to do something that could have benefited a lot more people in the world, maybe be an aid worker. That's promoting your own freedom to make your own choices about your career, but that does make a sacrifice in the kinds of benefits that you can promote elsewhere. And then finally, to get more to a kind of simple consumer decision, you might be exhausted, you don't really want to cook food at home, and so you decide you're going to get some takeout. You know that the places you like to go to, they all just use these styrofoam containers. You're going to get a bunch of extra plastic forks and all that. And, you may do that sometimes as a way of getting self-care, and you realize you need to take a break. But we do this all the time. We say, well, look, I know there's going to be some sort of environmental impact, but I do what I can to minimize it. Okay, so that's a way to be a responsible user when it comes to the environmental impact. But you might say, again, well, we have to weigh these trade-offs, but is there really any moral good from AI? You might say, look, maybe we're just getting a bunch of potential harms. We'll talk about some other harms later. Is there much moral good to be had here? Well, a lot of AI enthusiasts will say technology in general can be quite a force for moral good. So here's a bunch of charts that go back 200 years. And you can see that poverty has just dropped dramatically, even just in the past 20 years, especially extreme poverty. Education has gone up, literacy has gone up, democracy, vaccinations, child mortality has dwindled. These are largely due to technological advances in medicine and science, technology, electricity, railroads, clean water, vaccines, of course, and even smartphones and the internet. We've seen that there's a lot of potential harms coming out from social media and smartphones, things like an increase in depression and anxiety, especially among younger people, and unfortunately some suicide rates. Some people worry about the effect of social media and smartphones on democracy and misinformation and echo chambers. But of course, there are other, better uses. People have said that social media has been wonderful for, connecting ordinary citizens so they can organize. There's the Arab Spring that involved a lot of use of Facebook. And using old cell phones has allowed people in very poor countries to get access to the internet and to get microloans or direct loans from aid organizations. So just a lot of pros and cons, and at least AI enthusiasts think this will help to keep that trajectory going of increasing efficiencies, producing more wealth, producing advances in science and medicine. Okay, so that's some of the potential benefits, the moral benefits, really, not just sort of personal benefits. But some people might be kind of skeptical and say, this AI stuff's not really going to be all that transformative. It's mostly just going to contribute problems to society. Maybe it can't really do a lot of the intellectual work that it seems like we would need. And that seems right if it's not used very well. So I'll say a little bit about some of the use cases, but this may have come up in a previous talk. But there seems to be a consensus that chatbots in particular, they can be good for tapping into a system of knowledge that's in their training data, but not for particular one-off kinds of cases, especially if it's something novel or not in their training data. So let's give a couple of examples. So think about trying to use AI to help you pick winning stocks. That's just not possible. Nobody can predict the stock market anyway, unless you're Warren Buffett, but also not going to really help you in that kind of case because it's such a novel environment where things are changing and you're looking for a one-off company that's going to make it big. On the other hand, these AI systems can be quite helpful for learning about this body of knowledge about the stock market or about finances or navigating the maze of retirement programs, 401(k)s, 401(k), Roth IRA, learning about this broad system of knowledge. And for some people, it can be quite useful in that way. They may not have the money to hire a financial advisor. My biological father's he's a financial advisor at one of these big firms. He's not cheap, I can't afford him. But chatbot can help me to do some research and do some better investment in my own retirement, for example. Here's another not so great use case. Trying to find a particular legal case for precedent. You've seen probably in the news there have been lawyers who have been caught with creating fake cases as precedent because they used ChatGPT to try to find a very particular case that would help to support their argument. But that's when you start to get these hallucinations because they're asking for something very particular that might not actually be in the training data, but it's going to give its response and hallucinate. But again, there are better uses that can actually democratize access to knowledge too. So think about someone who doesn't have the money to hire a lawyer but can help to fight a frivolous lawsuit. I met with the local League of Women Voters not that long ago, and they were concerned about their use of AI systems and how they might contribute to environmental harm and things like that. And so they were concerned about that, but they also don't have a lot of money. They're a small group with not a lot of funds, and they have to navigate things like the legal system. And so they're trying to figure out what are the pros and cons. All right, one more not so great use case, really close to home for us educators, trying to generate an essay about some cutting edge issue. Not going to work out very well, not a good use of this tool. But using it to help you think, to help you come up with examples to illustrate a point you want to make, that can be a more useful version of this where it's tapping into, again, a system of knowledge that would be in its training data. Okay, so these are just some of the ways to do responsible use. But does this mean the AI is great? Again, not necessarily. It depends on the case. There are a lot of remaining concerns even about our everyday usage. So a lot of other harms I'll just kind of touch on very briefly, but we also need to approach them with a lot of humility because there's a lot of uncertainty here. So again, good, risky, or unknown, it's all of the above. So think about mass unemployment, for example. Some people are really worried that using these technologies is going to lead to a lot of people losing jobs. And that's certainly could happen, especially if it's very rapid. There would be a lot of jobs that get lost, and then people don't have the time to reskill, to change careers. Probably something that's on the minds of a lot of alumni from universities. And it's possible that could happen, but it's a lot of speculation here. It could turn out that AI is a normal technology that takes a long time to get rolled out and integrated into different industries, and can't really replace a lot of the jobs that we need to be doing. So it could go either way, and it's kind of hard to know in advance. So there's a lot of uncertainty there. We also talked about the kind of cognitive erosion that can happen, but there are ways to try to mitigate that and to use AI in a way that's not going to erode those abilities. A lot of creatives, artists and musicians are especially worried about this with unemployment, but also losing kind of creativity in the culture. There's also those concerns about increasing echo chambers and misinformation and affecting our political discourse. That could be a result too, certainly a concern. But there's also some interesting work out there suggesting that maybe at least large language models might be unlike social media algorithms in that they're designed to be useful and to tap into bodies of knowledge. And so there might not be quite as much in the way of misinformation. Of course, there's the hallucinations sometimes, but those are getting better, and there are ways of trying to avoid it. So potential harms, but also potential pathways for avoiding them. Another one that's really I take very seriously, especially as a parent of a 13-year-old daughter, is the ways that the AI use can impact our social skills. And we've already seen how social media and smartphones have had this kind of impact on mostly young people, but also just in general in society, people becoming more lonely and disconnected. And some people have formed these relationships with AI chatbots, and then it could lead them to be more isolated. There's delusions and things, but also in the worst cases, it can lead to helping them to take their own lives, which was tragically the case of this 14-year-old in Florida not that long ago, and there have been some other cases like that. So a lot of really serious potential concerns for society, but also it's very difficult to know exactly how this will all play out in the next 5, 10, 15 years. And it's not just harm that many people are worried about. There are also issues of privacy. As AI becomes more rolled into like these flock cameras that are around, that law enforcement is using, that might invade privacy or even eliminate privacy as we know it. That's certainly a major concern as these things roll out. Another one is local data centers. So even if you think, well, maybe your particular usage of AI is not going to be contributing that much to water usage or carbon footprint, there are local communities like over in Bessemer that are trying to make sure that if there's going to be a data center there, it's not going to raise energy prices for them or deplete local resources or be a bad deal for the community where they just don't get enough tax benefit. Also concerns about AI and the use of the military and these drones, and there could be errors that AI systems can create. Even if the hallucinations are rare or mistakes are rare, they can be highly consequential in the context of life or death. And then, of course, we are worried a lot about cheating in higher education. And as this comic highlights, there's also the broader concern some people have about rogue AI-powered robots eventually taking over and treating humans like their pests. But all of these are, very complicated. There's a lot of unknowns. There's a lot of speculation. And there's a lot of confidence, really high confidence on both sides of this issue for both the AI enthusiasts and the critics. But for many of these issues, I would urge us to be less confident about what the results will be. And we really just need to make sure that the ethics gets ahead of the future scenarios that will be could be bad for society. And there's certainly a lot of room for us to direct the deployment and use and governance of AI in a better direction for society. So that's partly why we do have this new graduate certificate at UAB, which I'm directing. And I wanted to tell you a little bit about that. So we do talk about all the ethical dimensions of AI. I've kind of looked at some of the tip of the iceberg here, but lots of topics that we get into, things like algorithmic bias and those privacy issues, other aspects of safety, accountability and governance, but also even really interesting deep philosophical issues about whether AI could become conscious or have a moral compass of its own. We'll actually be having a talk by a philosopher who's going to be getting into that issue in September. Maybe I can share it with Greg. He'll be on campus. And we have a lot of faculty here who are specializing in this. I've been doing some work on AI ethics. One paper was in collaboration with some people at Google too. This is Dr. Brainerd, Lindsay Brainerd, who's a colleague in my department. This is a screenshot of her talking to Good Day Alabama earlier this year about AI's impact on creativity. She's been doing a lot of really interesting research in that area, award-winning research, actually. So a lot of great teachers in this program, and we do have, it's 5 courses. 4 of them are core courses that are taught in the philosophy department. Things like an ethical dimensions of AI class, philosophy of AI. And then you can do the one elective, which can be in the philosophy department or outside, like in computer science. We are offering 2 of those core courses this semester. I'll be teaching one of them. It's a kind of foundation class called Philosophical Methods. And then we are also teaching an Ethical Dimensions of AI course taught by my colleague, Keshav Singh. Now, these are mostly in person, often in the evenings. My course is going to be on Wednesdays, 5 to 7:30. Same for the other course, but on a different day. But that's going to be the common trajectory for courses in this program. Another interesting feature about this grad certificate is it can lead to a master's. There is this program where you can stack different kinds of certificates at UAB, and only if they participate in this program. But if you do another certificate and you do a sort of capstone project, you can get a master's in interdisciplinary graduate studies. And there are a number of certificates that participate that would be fitting for the ethics of AI certificate. There's like AI in medicine, computer forensic, and things like that. Okay, so before we get to questions, I just wanted to give you some ways that you can connect with me or reach out to me. That is University Hall, which is where the philosophy department is. My office is roughly about there, I think, up on the 5th floor. And you can also connect with me online in various ways. So connect with me on LinkedIn. I like to stay connected with UAB alumni there. I also have a Substack newsletter. You can subscribe there if you'd like. And I write about ethical issues with AI, but also other issues about science and technology. And then you can stay connected with UAB Philosophy Department on Instagram over there. Okay, thanks so much, and really looking forward to questions and discussion.
Fantastic information. And I did drop the link to that course in the chat. I can go ahead and do this so we can highlight you. With that certificate, and this is specific to UAB employees, does UAB cover that cost of the certificate? Is it like a normal class course.
That's right. I mean, so there is the same educational benefit that applies to this, just as it would for any other certificate, any other graduate level work.
So many people are focused on what AI can do, which, I mean, it's endless. From an ethical standpoint, should we spend more time discussing what it should not do?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's our role as ethicists to some degree is to make sure that we could pump the brakes on the worst potential outcomes. But there's also, I think, a concern about us being maybe overly negative, only focusing on the downsides. In some ways, our profession, our role as ethicists, or even potential critics who are just the average consumer, we might have a tendency to be looking only for negatives. And that's partly why I put some of the positives into the presentation, because those are often overlooked. And it makes it seem like there aren't trade-offs here, but there are such trade-offs. And so I think we err if we're either too much on the side of just, full-blown criticism and negativity, but also on the enthusiast side. You see a lot of people who say AI is going to, be just the greatest thing for society since sliced bread, and we're going to have, robots, cheap robots in every home in 10 years. And the cost of goods and services will be next to nothing. That too is overly optimistic. So the truth is always, as an ethics, is somewhere in between. So I think we have to figure out, are we tending to, err on one side more than the other? But it also kind of makes sense to, given how much enthusiasm there is, to make sure that we're keeping a keen eye on the things that we should be avoiding.
Everybody having Rosie from the Jetsons finally, after all these years, I guess, right?
Yeah,
Having
right.
robots in their home.
10 years, I doubt it.
So do you believe AI requires stronger regulation? And if so, how do you regulate it? Who regulates it?
I mean, given that we have virtually no regulation, the answer seems to be that we need some. Even the CEOs of these companies are pretty united in thinking that there should be more regulation. How much and how, that's tricky, very tricky. And I think partly it comes from this issue that AI is not one thing, or there's not one use case. And so I think it is very hard to have a one size fits all when it comes to regulation, or even ethical guidelines. Not that we shouldn't have regulation, not that we shouldn't have ethical guidelines, but that it's going to be hard to have it be, one size fits all. And we're trying to figure it out. I don't know that anybody knows exactly what the best kind of regulation is here. Personally, I would think the most natural place to start, the easiest place to start politically, is the way that it affects young people. If you're an adult, you can do a lot of terrible. You can drink to excess, you can smoke, you can do all kinds of things as you're an adult. But for children, we say, hey, we're gonna have to infringe on some individual freedoms to protect kids. And so we're seeing a lot of that now with the discussion of social media, and that's had a lot more steam, a lot more success, I think, in trying to regulate some of those social media platforms. I worry about that with AI too, with young people, getting too sucked into an AI relationship. It makes sense to me to start there for sure. But beyond that, it gets very, very tricky to figure out what's going to be excessive regulation to stifle innovation when it comes to uses in for adults.
And that kind of segues into this, some of the things that you're just talking about. Do you see any ethical risks in becoming too dependent on AI for everyday thinking, creativity, decision-making, things like that?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, again, it's hard to have a one-size-fits-all.
Yeah.
I'm sure there are contexts where it's okay to rely on something that will then do it better for you. So when it comes to certain kinds of tasks, it's okay if we let a computer do it for us, or at least the benefits will outweigh the costs. And again, we always have those trade-offs. So it could be that, hey, I'm going to sacrifice my ability to do some graphic design because I'm not a graphic designer. So that's not part of my identity. It's not part of what I value. It's not part of my job. Now, if I was an art major, an art student, or if I was working in the art department, that's a different story, I think. That's part of my identity, part of who I am. It's part of the skills that I want to maintain. When it comes to thinking generally, I think most of us we should prize our critical thinking skills and all of that. But there are aspects like thinking of examples for you. That is not necessarily abdicating your thoughts. It really does feel like an assistance, and it may be that you become a little less able to think of examples yourself, but it doesn't seem like it's encroaching that much on your critical thinking abilities. Same thing with GPS. Like a lot of us can't navigate our own quite as well, and that's it's a loss, but the benefits can be quite dramatic, and so we all have to make that, I think, choice in our own cases and figure out is this part something that I want to make sure that I maintain. Or is it something that I'm willing to let erode? But by and large, I think it'll be important for humans to make sure that they're not letting these core abilities to think and reason erode, that they could be enhanced, but not replaced.
Somebody asked, what do you think of Mark Zuckerberg's recent essay advocating for the democratization of AI? And if you haven't read it, haven't looked at it, that's fine.
I haven't read it, but I do take seriously the idea that there can be a lot of benefits that can just sort of trickle down to people, and I mentioned some of those in the slides. And I've seen this myself. There actually was also in my own case I won't get into it, but a kind of frivolous lawsuit thing I'm not hiring a lawyer to help me with that, and I would have been I'll just say this: I would have been bullied around by a copyright agency. And Claude helps me to navigate that. That puts power into my hands that a lot, and I'm not the worst off in society by any means, but I do think it's a moral benefit if a lot of people out there who are of modest means suddenly have a somewhat decent lawyer in their pocket, have a somewhat decent, physician. You got to think about the alternative. It may be that they don't go to the doctor at all, or they don't see. And there's a lot of worries about, people getting, misinformation. But providing access to knowledge is really powerful for a lot of people who are of modest means. Now, I don't know that I trust Mark Zuckerberg to be giving the best version of that kind of, and it could be just kind of PR. But I think there are some real ethical benefits that we should take quite seriously. But again, it's hard to predict exactly how that's going to play out in the next 5 to 10 years.
Final question, then we'll let you go. If you could leave the audience with one guiding principle for thinking ethically about AI in their personal and professional lives, what would it be?
I only get one. Well, I gave some, in the slides, right, which I could just lean on there, but maybe I'll give something new. One of the things I've noticed is that already AI is getting very politicized, which I think is unfortunate, because then it falls into these scripts of, well, if you're going to be, a good Democrat or a good Republican, then, you have to be pro AI or against AI, or, and I think there's such a danger in falling into that kind of tribalism when it comes to this. It's such a new area. Things are developing so fast. It's hard to predict the impact that's going to have on society. I would say beware of tribalism. Beware of our own motivated reasoning. Like we already have our biases. You might, like, if you hate tech CEOs and all of that, you're going to be biased to thinking that there's nothing good here. There's nothing good for me. And I know people like this, right? But then there are people who are entrepreneurs and they think there's nothing but great things here. That there's just going to be a wonderful thing for society. I would say, beware this kind of black and white thinking, especially when it starts to get tribal and it becomes like, oh, in order to be a good member of my tribe, I'm supposed to think that AI is an environmental disaster. Maybe it is, maybe it won't. Or because of my political tribe I'm part of, I must think that this is going to be a disaster for employment. Maybe not. As things change and we get more evidence of how this is playing out, we'll have to be nimble, I think, rather than fixed with what our views are. And it might be that you say like, hey, I thought this was going to be terrible for average workers, and you find out maybe it's not so bad, or I thought this was an environmental catastrophe. It's okay to say like, oh, we've got more information in, and maybe things have gotten more efficient and so forth. So as always, when it comes to ethics and philosophy, it's like keeping an open mind, I think, and watching out for that kind of black and white thinking.
Fantastic. Dr. May, thank you so much for taking your time to be with us this afternoon.
Thank you. Yeah, it was a lot of fun.
You're so welcome. And just a quick note for today's audience, this webinar was recorded. Once it's online, we'll send an email with a link so you can check out the session again and again and again, and even share with others. As for the next 4 webinars on tap, we're going to wind down our AI series on August 27th, as mentioned earlier, with Behind the Screens, What AI-Powered Care Means for Patients. On September 18th, come back for From Powders to Performance, What's Worth It, What's Not. October 21st, join us for the new weight loss medications, Success, Surprises, and What's Next. This expands on a previous webinar hosted a couple of years ago, and it's a not miss virtual event. And finally, on November 3rd, we're going to be hosting Holiday Happy Hour, cocktails for every celebration, as we walk through some wonderful drinks that'll make your party shine even brighter. Register for these and more at alumni.uab.edu/events. As we wrap up, we'd love to hear from you. Your feedback helps us improve and shape future webinar topics. Just scan the QR code on your screen to access a brief survey and share your thoughts. Once again, thanks so much for joining us. And as always, go Blazers.